There's a question no one wants to know the answer to. What is a person's final feeling before entering the gas chamber? Fear? Regret? Or is there an absolute emptiness when you realize you only have a few minutes left to live? The answer lies somewhere within the cold walls of Santa Fe Penitentiary, which houses one of the most feared execution chambers in American history. These are rare films, recorded from old tapes, with a sound as raspy as the last breath of an era. Santa Fe Prison isn't completely abandoned. Some areas are still operational, and the automatic irrigation system still ticks along regularly. But no one comes here for the old cells or the moss-covered corridors. They came to witness the gas chamber, a death chamber using poisonous gas, a relic of cruel justice. The cells here are pretty spacious, unlike the cramped matchboxes people often imagine. But then you see it. The small room behind the thick, transparent glass, like a fish tank, with a solitary metal chair in the middle. The dark leather straps, old and stiff after decades, still hung limply. And the spinning wheel, a detail as strange as if taken from the helm of a pirate ship in Pirates of the Caribbean, is mounted on the outside, used to control the exhaust valve. You wonder why they didn't choose a more formal professional design for this killing machine. But perhaps that is the brutal truth. Death doesn't need to be beautiful. The gas chamber was first used by the United States in 1924 in the state of Nevada and was promoted as a more humane method of execution compared to hanging or the electric chair. Why? The condemned prisoner is said to die quickly and painlessly. But the reality is quite different. When the sodium cyanide pellet fell into the sulfuric acid bath below the seats, a chemical reaction produced hydrogen cyanide gas, the same poison the Nazis used in gas chambers during World War II. It usually takes 8 to 10 minutes for a condemned prisoner to die. During that time, their bodies convulsed violently, their lungs struggled to breathe but only inhaled the poison, their faces changed color, and their eyes rolled back. Witnesses behind the glass often have to turn away. Greensville Prison in Virginia also had a similar room. After each execution, poisonous smoke was drawn out through the ventilation system, spreading into the air like the soul of the recently deceased. It was the last smoke anyone wanted to see. The ultimate smoke chamber, as one former prisoner described it. And then, in the late 1990s, gas chambers were gradually phased out. Not out of compassion, but because the U.S. Supreme Court ruled it violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. The last person executed by gas in Arizona was Walter LeGrand in March 1999. It took him 18 minutes to die, and his wheezing breaths echoed through the cell until his last. Now, the room in Santa Fe is just a silent museum. But if you stand in front of the glass long enough, you can almost feel the presence of the souls who sat in that chair, looking through the glass at the faces of those who came to witness their deaths. The iron door creaked open with a long, mournful sound, like a lament. It was a terrifying sound that any prisoner would be familiar with, the sound of freedom being shut away behind them. We're in the Camden and Cumberland County jails in the early 1980s, or maybe the late 1970s. It's difficult to say for sure, as time seems to have stood still here. The style of that era had something special about it. The men in prison wore Champion tracksuits and Converse All-Star shoes, items that remain timeless to this day. A person is sleeping with their legs hanging off the edge of the bed, a strange but familiar position for anyone who has had to sleep in a cramped space, a fluffy afro hairstyle, and a clean-shaven face. This was the disco era, when the music outside was dazzling. But within these walls, life moved as slowly as molasses. Living conditions in Camden at that time were not as bad as people thought. The space wasn't too cramped. Unlike today, when you step into Camden, you'll see prisoners packed in like sardines in a box. Statistics show that the number of prisoners per cell has increased by nearly 300% since the 1970s. At this time, everyone has their own space, can hang clothes on the clothesline, and even has milk cartons neatly arranged on the shelf. Those milk cartons weren't just a drink, they also carried the faces of missing children, printed on the surface from 1984 to the mid-1990s. This program has helped find dozens of children, but for the prisoners, those faces were a reminder that outside, Life was still going on while they were frozen here. The floor of the cell is covered with thick mattresses that resemble those with springs inside, not as bad as people think prison mattresses are. There are benches to sit and eat, and the common living space is relatively comfortable. Some people were curled up on the floor like dogs in kennels, but they seemed to be sleeping soundly. The boiler room, where the boilers are located, emits a steady rumbling sound constantly. That's the kind of sound that many prisoners say helps them sleep at night. A strange paradox. In the free world, noise keeps people awake, but in prison, it becomes a lullaby. The gym is a rare privilege. They had primitive exercise equipment, perhaps for squats or trap training. But prison fitness enthusiasts always found ways to turn a simple tool into a full-body machine. Basketball still looks the same as it does now. The backboard might be a little older. But one thing has changed: the gym's operating hours. Previously, prisoners were allowed out into the yard twice a week. Now, that number has decreased to once, sometimes only once every 2 weeks. The system is changing, not for the better. There's a window overlooking the street. For some, it's a gift to see the outside world. But for those who know they will never return there, that window is the most cruel punishment. Time in prison doesn't pass linearly like it does outside. It's repetitive, day after day, week after week, until you can't remember how long you've been here. In 1975, the annual cost of incarcerating a prisoner was approximately $3,000. Today, that number is $40,000, but the conditions? No better, even worse. Community of the Condemned. The Community of the Condemned. That's the name of an old documentary, filmed from the early years of the American prison system. The screen was blurry, the announcer's voice was serious, and instead of blurring faces like today, they covered them with strange black circles. The technology is rudimentary, but the story is timeless. The interviewer sat in the jail cell, facing a seasoned prisoner. He's been to San Quentin, Fort Madison, Iowa, and Statesville, names that sound heavy just hearing them. "How long have you been here?" the interviewer asked. "A month and a half," he replied. But in total, he lived in prison for 17 years. 17 years, nearly 2 decades, to learn and live by a code that the outside world will never understand. Inmate code, the unwritten rules of prisoners, is not written down on paper. It was passed down orally, taught through action, and enforced with violence if necessary. The basic principles remain unchanged. Never talk to the police. Never steal from your fellow inmates. Don't borrow if you can't afford to repay it. Respect other people's personal space. And most importantly, never become a snitch. Violate any of these and you'll be completely isolated. Or worse, you'll be marked. And in the prison world, once you're labeled a snitch, death can come at any moment. At San Quentin, nearly 70% of internal violence incidents are not due to personal conflict, but rather to violations of the inmate code. But how do prisoners communicate with each other in a place designed to isolate them? There are people called runners, the prisoner explained. They held various jobs in prison and carried messages throughout the facility. These messages are called kites, small folded pieces of paper hidden in shoe soles, wall crevices, food, and even swallowed if necessary. This system works incredibly smoothly. Even if you're locked in the whole solitary confinement, you can still know what's happening outside, Torney said. He told me about being imprisoned in the hole many years ago and wanted to know what happened to the person who stabbed him. And he still gets messages, thanks to the manager of the hole himself. The chapel is one of the most significant locations within this system. That's the only place where prisoners from different cell blocks can legally meet. Outsiders think they come to pray, but in reality, many come to complete transactions, deliver messages, or resolve conflicts. We use every opportunity we can, even the chapel, to communicate things we don't want the administration to hear, the prisoner said. They use sign language, codes, and methods that only insiders understand. There's a true story about a prisoner at Statesville. He stole his cellmate's radio. That's a serious violation of the inmate code of conduct. He was stabbed to death in the training yard. More than 50 people witnessed it. No one spoke. No one saw it. That is the power of this law. It doesn't need police. It doesn't need courts. It executes itself. The host asked, So, is it true that the prison is actually run by the inmates, not by the warden and his regulations? The prisoner nodded. That's right. There's always a way to stay informed about what's going on. Because inmate code isn't just a set of rules. It's how people who have been deprived of everything create order out of chaos. It's how they retain their final dignity in a place designed to strip away everything. The interviewer in the old documentary asked a final question. So even if the prison is run by a warden with all the regulations, the reality is that the prisoners are the ones who truly control life here. The prisoner nodded in affirmation. That's right. And this truth never changes. If you take that interview clip, replace the actors, adjust the audio, and play it back today, it would still be completely accurate. Not a single word needs correction. Because American prisons, despite decades of reform and billions of dollars in investment, still operate on the same unwritten principle. Prisoners are the backbone of the system. Think about this. 85% of the work in a typical prison is done by the inmates themselves. They cook for thousands of people, clean every day, repair broken pipes, mow the lawn, do laundry, and even build and expand new buildings. They are chefs, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, gardeners, all paid an average of just 14 cents to 41 per hour. In some states, they receive no compensation at all. This isn't renovation. This is Buddhist labor. The prison industrial complex, a term few outside understand, is an $80 billion industry. The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world, 639 people per 100,000 residents. A total of 2.3 million people are currently incarcerated. And this system cannot exist without the cheap labor of the very people it imprisons. Large corporations contract with prisons to produce goods, from furniture to electronic components, at almost zero labor cost. Prisoners have no right to strike, no unions, and no insurance. They had only two choices: work or solitary confinement. And in that environment, with hundreds of prisoners moving throughout the prison to work every day, the system of runners, the messengers, never disappeared. They were still there, silently, effectively, inviolable. The inmate code is still respected. The snitch is still punished. The space inside the chapel is still used for exchanging information. Everything is still the same. There's a story about a 70-year-old former prisoner who, after being released from prison for 20 years, returned to visit his old prison during a public tour. He stood in the training yard, looked around, and said to the instructor, "Are the runners still there?" The tour guide was confused and didn't understand what he was saying, but an old guard standing nearby smiled and nodded. Still, the code remains. Prison walls can change color over time, from gray to yellow and back to gray. Technology can advance, from VHS tapes to digital surveillance cameras. But suffering is still the same color. Loneliness still has the same sound. And the inmate code, the code of the condemned, is still the only thing keeping them from completely falling apart. Prison is not a place for rehabilitation. It is a living museum of judicial system failure, where time stands still, people are forgotten, and lessons are never learned. From the gas chambers of the 1920s to modern solitary confinement cells, one truth remains constant. We have built a machine we don't know how to turn off.